Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's Harmful Algal Bloom Task Force meeting. It's November 6th. Before I take roll call, I just wanted to remind you that this meeting is open to the public and is streaming online at our FWC YouTube channel. That is www.youtube.com/FWC Research. And we have a great agenda for today. And thank you for joining virtually. Before we start the meeting, we will go ahead and do roll call. So at that time, if you could please unmute yourself and let us know if you're present. We'll go through the list. Don Anderson.
I'm here.
Emily Cooley.
I'm here.
Dwayne DeFries. Ray Dortch.
Present.
Chuck Jacoby.
Present.
Barb Kirkpatrick.
I am here.
Sherry Larkin. Michelle Smith.
Present.
Rhonda Watkins.
I'm here.
Dave Whiting.
I'm here.
Great. Okay. So today we will start out with a few of our general updates related to an overview of what's going on with the current bloom and some of our updates from working groups. We also will have some of our presentations.
Is now joining.
Good afternoon, Sherry. Thanks for joining.
Thanks.
Okay. And we're really privileged today to have some of the recipients of the last HAB grant call for our task force HAB grants. These are listed on our website, but today we'll have presenters from 3 of those projects. And so again, we're really excited to have those today. We've been promising those for a while. Before we get started, I am going to go ahead and give an update on the current bloom situation. And if you give me a second, I'm going to share some slides. Okay, and just give me a second to put in presenter view. So I wanted to take us back to prior to some of the storms that have recently passed. We started to see cells present in samples from Southwest Florida prior to the passage of Helene. And just for reference, Helene made landfall on September 26th. So I'm showing the map. You can't see background samples, but we did have 11 samples that contain red tide. And these were generally present from Pinellas County to Charlotte County. So we did have red tide present, kind of at its normal time. And I'm just going to go through a little bit of a sequence that takes us to where we are today. We were able to conduct a South Florida ecosystem restoration survey. This is a collaborative survey that we partner with NOAA, AOML, USF, MOAT, and others to conduct. And here we have a map showing IFCB sampling that occurs underway through the flow-through system. And this is just to show that we have a few dots where Carenia brevis was confirmed. Those are the colors that are a little bit different. We also have a few other places circled here where we had other Carenia species present, or we saw Carenia present, but it wasn't enough to trigger a different color based on the abundance. So this again just kind of confirms that we had Carenia present before the hurricane passage, and also that we were seeing quite a few other species, up to 6 different species in some samples. Okay, so then post Helene, again, Helene passed on the 26th, and we were able to get some samples, and we were able to confirm that there was Carnea brevis offshore. Here's some of the satellite imagery prior to an offshore trip that we were able to make. The weather throughout this entire time has been pretty cruddy, and so getting access offshore has been challenging. So we've had to send people out in not the best conditions, and trying to use some different boats that are a little bit more accustomed and prepared for those swells that we've been having. So just again, seeing this offshore chlorophyll signal, we were able to go out and do some ground truthing and show that there was red tide present. We also were able to see that red tide was occurring in some of our shore-based samples. And then we had Milton go through, and after that, we were able to get some really decent satellite imagery. We were also able to do a few different additional response surveys to try to, again, ground truth what was offshore. And at the time, we were seeing this sort of higher elevated chlorophyll patch to the north, but we were also seeing this other chlorophyll patch to the south. And unfortunately, we weren't really able to ground truth this at the time. We've continued to have pretty strong easterly winds and northeasterly winds, and so that's helped push these patches around, particularly south and offshore. And I believe I have a composite image where I'll show that in just a little bit. I did want to share, we were able to go out and do some sampling. This was a few weeks after Milton passed. We were able to go take a mooring survey where they go out and service moorings off the West Florida shelf and add in red tide response sampling. So we're really grateful to our partners at USF for allowing us to kind of commandeer their trip. We again had an IFCB present, and what we were seeing is patchy distributions of Carnea brevis. And this is just what the IFCB saw on the trip. And we were able to confirm that not only was Carnea brevis out there, but there was a pretty mixed population. Things were, again, we use the word patchy a lot, but that's one of the best ways to describe what we see. So some red tide, but also a lot of diatoms were present. So as we interpret those chlorophyll images, it's important to just recognize that it's not all red tide. There's likely other things out there too. We sampled approximately 3 weeks post Milton, and this is just what the map was showing. We started to get some increased reports of fish kills in areas where we had observed red tide as well. And in this area, we were able to do some additional offshore sampling in collaboration with MOAT and other partners here at FWI. Then we kind of lost ability to get out on the water last week. Conditions just were not amenable to going out. So this is the report that we're going to be working on putting out later today. And we are still continuing to see elevated chlorophyll along much of Southwest Florida. From some of the samples that we've gotten this week, we're still finding elevated levels. So Carnea brevis above background, but so far we haven't seen anything above that bloom threshold of 100,000 cells per liter. So no orange or red dots yet. Obviously, we don't have samples from these areas. We do have a collaborative survey that is leaving late this week, and that will be leaving from Miami, and it will extend up past Pasco County. We're adding a few additional transect lines to that. So we'll have a great chance to map out what we're seeing with the IFCB. And the goal is actually to bring a second IFCB on board so that we can run discrete samples from subsurface. One of the things that is kind of interesting is that with these strong easterly winds and fairly persistent easterly winds, we have seen that the net flow or net circulation for the surface has been predominantly away from shore, so western movement, and that likely is setting up localized upwelling. So any cells that are near the bottom, they could be transported onshore at that time. So this cruise will be really helpful for mapping out those vertical distributions as well as getting a sense for what's in some of those elevated chlorophyll patches. Unfortunately, we are preparing for another storm to pass through the Gulf, and with that, we are expecting from the USF forecast for there to be northern movement of these surface patches. So should be interesting to see what the next few days brings. And again, we're really grateful to be able to go out on this collaborative survey and get a better sense for what's going on. We've also been able to send the IFCB data and maps back to shore so that while folks are on the cruise, we can get a sense of what's going on. So again, just wanted to share a little bit about this current event, just a little bit about some of the efforts that are ongoing. One additional thing that I wanted to share, we are seeing a lot of diatoms in those samples that are collected along shore. This is one diatom that seems to be particularly prevalent right now. And so just wanted to share that again to say that algae are always kind of surprising and dynamic, and certainly this event has sort of proven that, and we will continue to sample. While I would love it if the diatoms outcompeted Carenia brevis and this bloom was very, very short-lived, we're just going to have to wait and see what happens. So with that, I'm going to pause. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and see if there are any questions. Any questions from task force members? Stuck in a PowerPoint vortex. Okay, not seeing any questions. Let's go ahead and keep moving with our agenda today. So we will now continue with some roundtable updates. And so I wanted to start off and see if we have any updates from our communications working group.
Chuck?
Not to put you on the spot or anything, Rhonda and Chuck.
I think it's me, from what I was just told. So yeah, the communications work group has been plugging away. We have next video that we've been working on, which is, I guess I'll call it pet health for the lack of a better term, where we've looked at the initial production and script, and so that's something that we've been spending some time on. Still working on consistency of language among websites, and that's something that we'll plug away at. We had discussed trying to come up with some verbiage dealing with how nutrients and red tide interact, but we will probably await the outcomes of the State of the Science Symposium early in 2025 to go ahead and work on that some more. We're certainly put out a call for contacts in middle schools to use the curriculum that's been developed. So Megan will handle that. And I think that's about it.
Thanks so much, Chuck. Let's move to our HAB Health Working Group. Emily Cooley.
Yes, I don't have any slides to share, but I can share an update about the HAB Health Working Group and a little bit of what occurred during our last meeting, which was in August. So with the working group, we wanted to get some conversations going about training for healthcare professionals on HABs. So we invited a couple of FDOH epidemiologists to join the meeting and join the conversations. We wanted them to be included so that they could help us discuss ideas, help us to figure out what audience that we're planning to target, and how do we get those training materials distributed out to that audience. Another thing that we did in our last meeting is that we continued our review of our occupational HAB exposure guidelines documents. We have working drafts going, but not complete versions yet. So that'll be continued on throughout the rest of the year. We also invited an FDOH veterinarian epidemiologist to present to our HAP Health Working Group. She works around Florida currently to educate veterinarians on HABs, and she's also a member of our HAB Health Working Group. So she provided an overview to the group kind of about the educational and training materials that she's developed for veterinarians. And she's also been working on figuring out a couple case definitions for pets and HABs. So we were hoping to use kind of, her name is Sherry Casper, our veterinarian, a little bit of structure that she's got to apply that to how we're going to do our healthcare professional training for HABs. I think that's it. We have meetings quarterly, so our next one should be November, but we had some scheduling conflicts. So the next HAB Health Working Group meeting is going to be in December. That's it.
Thanks so much, Emily. I know we're excited to see some of those products, so it's great to hear updates there. Okay, so now we are going to transition into a presentation by Kevin Claridge. This will be a presentation on the Florida Red Tide Mitigation and Technology Development Initiative, as well as the HAB incubator that is being funded by NOAA. So Kevin, I'd like to introduce you. He is the Vice President for Sponsored Research and Coastal Policy Programs at Mote Marine Laboratory. Go ahead and take it away, Kevin. Thanks for coming.
Can you hear me okay, Kate?
And your sound is really faint for me. I don't know if there's any way to make it louder. Maybe it's just me.
Can talk real close to the screen. Is that any better if I raise my voice, maybe?
That is better.
Okay.
Thank you.
Can you see the?
We can see the slides, but they're not in presentation mode.
Not a bad mode. Leave it in that mode. Okay, I can't see. Oh well, is that okay if I leave it there, Kate? Sorry to so I don't make everybody
Yep.
wait. Okay.
I think that's fine.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry about that. So yeah, thanks for a little bit of time. I know I've been met with this group before, tried to give a little update periodically on what's going on both the Florida Red Tide Mitigation and Technology Development Initiative and the U.S. Harmful Algal Bloom Control Technology Incubator. The initiative, obviously in partnership with the state. I'll cover a little, just a quick review for those maybe not aware of that quickly, and the incubator in partnership with NOAA and the University of Maryland. So for those that may be not aware of the Red Tide Initiative, it was originally signed by the governor in 2019, codified in Florida statutes, and most recently has gone through an update statutorily to highly focus on the deployment of the mitigation tools being developed through the lab-based tests, the early tiers that I'll talk about in a second, to try to get those out actually into the water. There's numerous reporting requirements. Anyone interested in that can reach out to me through contractual stuff, through FWC, through our website, through things like this, and outreach, through a technology advisory council meeting. That actually, I'll talk about that in a little bit. That's actually next week. But anyone interested in those or any of the reports coming out of this, be happy to share those. Quickly, the legislative intent is to develop mitigation technologies and approaches for red tide. General structure was to develop a lab space to be able to grow a large amount of Carinia brevis, build the raceways and mesocosm structure so we could test things safely in a lab structure, all leading up to bringing those tools out into the for field use. And through the presentation here, I've tried to highlight some things in red. I know some of you have seen this before, especially the TAC members or the task force members. Quick summary there at the bottom for where we're at with the initiative, and right down to the brass tacks is sending things through the tiered research testing, conducting in parallel all the regulatory requirements associated with that, looking at things like intellectual property for developing. A lot of these are new technologies, new science, new things coming out of this, looking at all of the technologies and tools and scalability and the supply lines and how those actually become real world functional tools that could be used on a regular basis for mitigation. Looking at deployment options, how are you going to get these, maybe if it's a liquid or a powder or a pellet, is it going out, on drones or into the water column or spraying on top of the water? There's a lot of different deployment options, or even if it's a water treatment style thing, or different types of things you might put in smaller settings and canals. How are these tools getting out into the actual water for use? A big component is community engagement. I'll talk a little bit more about that. But we've had some workshops and we're continually hosting presentations. We're out in the community trying to socialize this as much as possible. And we're at a stage now of looking at once these tools are out there for use, what kind of continued monitoring, what triggers for initial deployment, follow-up deployment, those types of things. All these things come together to develop a mitigation option. It's really a lot of pieces of the puzzle. It's taken really a village. I keep adding more and more logos to this. You can see everything from local governments in here to maybe investors, the companies we've worked with, the agencies, universities, law firms, a lot of different pieces for this, all those components I was talking about a second ago for mitigation options to get out into the field. So really has taken a lot of expertise, a lot of different cross-discipline work. This next slide, even though it says, I'll talk about this the second half of the presentation, the control technology incubator, but here's the tiered steps. I always like to lay this out. The incubator, again, which I'll talk about, the second half is more of the tier one, the lab-based things, the tabletop or the tanks without triggering many of the regulatory requirements, versus the Red Tide initiative is really trying to run the gamut of all these to actually get out into the field, considering all those items on the bottom, the effects on the cells and toxin, regulatory approvals, any effects on the natural community, ecological impacts, health impacts, logistical issues, starting with pilot studies in canals, taking it to the next study, looking who the customers are, state and local budgets to be able to consider some of these options as a regular deployment and mitigation option. So lots of different pieces to consider again as you move through these different tiers. Many of you seen this slide before, but an early component was to develop the laboratory resources. So the actually space, I won't go too much into the bullets there, as many of you seen this before, but the lab space where we can safely test and again culture the red tide so that we can do the testing before even considering going out into the field with any mitigation option. This is another very busy slide. Sorry, it's a complex puzzle for the regulatory oversight, and I thank all the many partners who've been assisting with this, all the different agencies. And there's a lot of different paths that can take for different technologies as you're considering them. You start very early with EPA, and if you're looking at a couple different regulations there, Insecticide, Fungicide, Rodenticide Act, and then also Food, Drug, Cosmetic Act, before even coming into possibly the state of Florida for Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services consideration, and if successful, getting through a couple of those steps, working closely with Florida Department of Environmental Protection, who's also reaching out to other agencies such as Fish and Wildlife Commission for comment. In parallel, if you're getting out into the water, obviously for or an environmental resource permit or even exemption of consideration of Army Corps of Engineers and any navigable water, those kind of requirements, or effects to the water bottom or sovereign submerged lands and so forth. And as well, the Florida Department of Health of trying to consider any human health impact, even want to make sure everyone's informed on what we're doing and all the different testing that's been conducted. So this is a lot of different steps. It takes a long time to think through these, and some of the folks on this call, I know have been involved in that and sure appreciate the ones that have so far getting through some of this maze. Quick summary of the Red Tide progress thus far. Again, highlighting in red some of the key things. As you know, we've been testing hundreds and hundreds of tools and technologies. We've had lots of outreach and technology advisory council meetings, call for proposals, reviewed lots of proposals. Next Tuesday, we have the next technology advisory council meeting under the initiative statute, and there we'll also cover some of the projects I'll talk about in a second, but maybe a little bit deeper dive into some of the regulatory assistance we're trying to provide. For example, we have a consultant that we've contracted to try to assist some of the projects and PIs on these projects to get through that regulatory maze I was just talking about. We'll have our third workshop at the end of January. We had it scheduled right when Helene was hitting, so we had to reschedule. But we hope to bring the same group back again and many new partners. Usually this is 75 people plus of all these different disciplines I was talking about that come together in one room and try to work through each year, building upon the past year's successes and trying to learn more from each other and how to fit all those puzzle pieces together to actually get out to tangible things to be utilized. We do have another report required by statute to the governor, legislature, and agency heads due January 15th. So that'll be coming out very soon. We're working on that now. And as mentioned before, this past legislative session, we had an update to the Red Tide Initiative statute, which we were guided to specifically focus on developing the field trial technologies and work closely with the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, DEP, on getting reports to them for their review under the regulatory process to consider if any of these, looking at all the reports and all the science and all the background that's been done to consider approval to get out into the field. So this is a quick summary. I called it notes. There's some loose bullets in here. I'll run through them quickly and maybe answer any questions at the end of if anyone has specifics of where we're at on those that are actually getting ready into that field testing component. There's a product called Clear. I have to give full kudos. I know she's speaking a little bit later. Dr. Dana Wetzel's lab produced this natural plant compound, wove through all the different regulatory processes. It's a minimum risk compound considered by EPA, also considered a food grade exempt. We're working on getting larger amount of this product to be able to begin testing in a larger spraying component. She's already done some field canal testing with this, and also looking at some slow dissolve or some different types of technologies for pellets for this. There's the Ozonix brand or product or technology, should say. Largely cavitation, mobile wastewater treatment style thing, also with an ozonation option. I think many of us have seen that before. He's on the final throes of getting his NPDES permit, National Pollution Discharge Elimination System, any day now, and getting out in the field and working in mostly in at least initially a smaller setting, canals and so forth. There's a product called Extreme by Heartland Energy Group. That's another natural product. It has achieved all the regulatory requirements to get into the field. Would have at least initially a larger supply chain. It's been used in other capacities. If a red tide bloom did come, we might look to them to possibly do some expanded testing in more than maybe one canal, maybe a dozen canals, or a larger experimental design. Clay, Dr. Anderson's on the call. I won't steal his thunder either, but working closely with him, have to give him a high five as well for all the patience and help in navigating the regulatory requirements. But just a clay product, but with the opportunity of maybe adding something to that as an active ingredient. And you're getting into the weeds of EPA definitions there to possibly add something like that for a deployment. We've had continued success with curcumin, a natural food grade product that Moat has been working with. It's maybe something else you can add to flocculant, a clay, a chitin, a carbon, but having success with that is a natural algicidal properties. And Lake Guard Oxy, a product from Blue Green Water Technologies, largely sodium percarbonate, that minus a DEP approval, which they already have freshwater approval, would be highly considered for another mitigation option. Others at the bottom there, nearing field testing. You guys a full list there. More natural plant compounds, bacteria, archaea, electromagnetic energy. We've seen success with carbon pellets, and many others weaving through the second part of this presentation. Hopefully I'm moving fast enough, Kate. I know I'm eating up a lot of time. Under the U.S. HAB Control Technology Incubator. Talk about that in a second, but I kind of touched on this already. What are we going to be doing over the next 6 months or year under the Red Tide Initiative? Working a lot with local governments, focusing on EPA requirements to get into the next stages of regulatory approval, looking hard at supply chains and how we get those products that would be available at a larger scale for deployment. Defining and redefining with all the partners, all the agency folks, field testing and monitoring and triggering deployment criteria and retreatment, et cetera, and feeding those other products coming out of the U.S. HAB Control Technology Incubator into the initiative to be considered for testing, but also some of the other funding from other partners of the NOAA, PCM HAB, or Army Corps of Engineers, or EPA funding that seems to be increasing on the harmful algal bloom front as well. I've talked about this before in this meeting, so I won't go too much into the backgrounds of this. The partnership of NOAA, Maryland, and MOAT. This is both fresh and marine, scalable, environmental, acceptable, cost-effective, and help navigate the permitting processes for any products. They're very lab-based oriented. But another key component of this I added in red, which I think I saw more. We just saw a lot of us came back from the U.S. Harmful Algal Bloom Symposium in Maine, but seeing more and more sessions and mitigation options and things, and a lot more buzz around mitigation. And I think that's been a big component of the CTI to try to stir up that interest in generating some new science for mitigation options. What have we done so far with the CTI? Looking quick, I think I talked about the 2023 previous before, had a big surge of interest, getting much more focused in 2024. We had a RFP focused on Pseudonychia and Alexandrium, though really receiving proposals on anything. At the bottom there, at the end of the day, after all the review processes, we funded 6 projects, 5 in a marine capacity and 1 in fresh. In quick summary of what those projects are, you can see a lot going on and helping Florida, so that's a good thing for those folks on this task force, I believe. But Pseudonychia, Microcystis, Corynea, Alexandrian pyridinium, all in Florida here and trying to move the science along for mitigation things. But you can see where some of the other projects have been conducted, and some of this science though doesn't show the western coast. Some of the work is being done on similar species for there, but there's a gap there that we definitely need to try to increase work with our partners on the West Coast. Quick on the 2024 projects, what are we looking at? The bolded there, quick summary of cultivated seaweeds, algicidal bacteria, another hydrogen peroxide product mixed with TAML, and I can give more detail on that if folks have questions. Curcumin is in the mix here for some different species on Alexandrian Pseudonychia rather than just Corynea. Biochar and clay also in the mix, and furthering the not only the science but the regulatory steps associated with those. So next steps for the CTI, there's a webinar also next week on CTI with more details, and here's the general timeline for those folks that you may have asking you questions on about submitting some new science. They can find all the information out if you do a quick internet search of US HAB CTI or Control Technology Incubator. You can find the information out how to submit a proposal. One quick asterisk there on this announcement: each year we try to focus in on a geographic range or species or part of the life cycle. You can see here we're looking researching the control of the cysbeds and seeking more proposals on those this year for the 2025 RFP. Last slide here for the CTI, a big component again is regulatory clearinghouse. I can't harp this enough how much time is spent on the regulatory process. Not ever trying to hinder or limit the environmental protection side of things, but really focusing in on the processes and how to get it through the steps or the divisions or the right stops, especially early in EPA. And we had some great conversations at the US HAB symposium about moving that forward. We're also getting law centers involved, interns, trying to really bring the whole village behind it to take this a hard look at it with some good legal eyes and start to work real closely with each of the agencies on navigating this. I couldn't have done any of it without a lot of partners, NOAA, FWC, Taylor Armstrong at the CTI program, Liz Longstreet at MODE, all the MODE scientists, all the partners, the slide I put up. So really has been an amazing group of folks all working together to come this far. So with that, I'll stop sharing and hopefully didn't go too long, Kate.
Thanks so much, Kevin. I have a question for you, but I also want to give the task force time to ask questions. So any questions from the task force? Go ahead, Don.
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Kevin. This is actually more of a comment for the task force, but correct me if you have a different perception. It's unfortunate that essentially all of the technologies that are really moving ahead are those that have to rely on compounds that are on these minimum risk lists or have threshold tolerance exemptions, things like this. And it's really a shame that new products, really new innovative chemicals or extracts or whatever, face a very daunting future. And I know you're aware of that. I'm just making sure the task force knows it. But the question, I guess, behind it is, are you yet at the stage, or are you ever going to be at the stage where when you evaluate CTI proposals or even initiative proposals, you start to say, well, the pathway for registration or approval or testing for this product is likely to be so tedious and difficult that we can't fund it. And we have to go with these less innovative and maybe less effective things. Are we there yet? Or are we still funding things that are really risky and have a long pathway ahead of them?
So it probably, as you know, Don, probably complicated answer, but we are trying to build things into the CTI, allowing funding for that regulatory assistance component now. I think we had language in this one or open to allowing funding for those regulatory steps to head down those paths. Also have, really tried to get creative, for example, if you're a state or a federal government entity, you're able to apply for the EPA registration for, say, a product, and you wouldn't be charged. Some of these fees are enormous. I think one we were looking at, Don, I was, $800,000-$900,000, and that was one step possibly.
Right.
So trying to get creative to do that, but I think I sure have that pause, from all we've been through, that if it's a technology I'm not sure EPA would consider, I do have a lot of, should we invest a lot of more time in the science just because of the regulatory difficulties?
Mm-hmm. Great, thanks.
Thanks, Don. Thanks, Kevin. Any other questions? I'll go ahead and ask my question, and then if there are any others after that. But I sit on the technical advisory committee for the Florida Red Tide Mitigation and Technology Development Initiative, and that's mandated in Florida statute. I was just wondering if there's a similar advisory group for the CTI and what that looks like and how you determine which grants to fund as part of that effort.
No, appreciate that. Great question, and look forward to, sorry, Kate, put you through this next Tuesday, probably on the TAC as well. So appreciate your comments for the Red Tide Initiative. For CTI is similar, and we almost built it similarly off of the Red Tide Initiative structure. So we do have, I'm trying to remember all of the, it's, EPA, USGS, Army Corps, academic, local government, business, those types of folks that sit on the, there it's called the advisory board, I believe. Yes, for CTI. And then for CTI, we have, you saw the timeline there. We have the call for proposals that goes out to volunteer reviewers. We can, to have scientists that their expertise to try to get about 5 proposals each for review each time. I think last time we had about 60 come in for that initial, it comes in through the LOI process, and then the executive board looks at those. So Moat, University of Maryland, NOAA, others, before it goes to those that we recommend for review by scientific review. And then those would be provide comments and scores. Then it would be all kind of a short list presented to the advisory board to take a look at those final, maybe if we're picking 7, you get it down to the final 10 or so for some final comments. And anyone's been on those review boards, you can kind of juggle budgets and things a little bit to try to really pull out key components, especially in mitigation, that you might be able to marry this topic or that science with that technology to really produce the best funded projects.
And then just a quick follow-up, and I don't know what this would look like, but is there, just something to think about? Would there be opportunities in the future for the advisory board and the TAC to interact in some way? Because it sounds like some of the functions that they're serving are fairly similar. And again, not sure what that would look like, but it seems like it would be a great way to kind of harness the power of both groups to kind of move some key points forward.
I'd be happy to try to pull that together. I think that's what this has always been about. I think of bringing all the ideas and brains and thoughts, especially as you're seeing additional funding. I know you're probably seeing it too, Kate, maybe even at the US HAB Symposium, we heard more about it, either from the Army Corps and EPA, so that, maybe those things could be brought in and considered by the state task force as options too for funding or science or partnerships. I think that's a good idea.
And last chance for any other questions from the HAB task force members. All right, let's thank Kevin for his presentation. Thanks so much, Kevin. We're always eager to have updates from you on this topic. Great. Okay. So for the next part of the meeting, we are going to have presentations from our HAB grants recipients. These are presenters from projects that were funded in the 2022 to 2024 HAB grant cycle. And these did come directly from task force priority recommendations. So we'll be having 3 different presentations. The first will be Krista Court on the Composite Red Tide Vulnerability Index. The second will be Youngang Liu on developing a physical biological model for Carnea brevis. And the third will be Dana Wetzel, a land-based shellfish deprivation mitigation strategy. After that, we will have a 2:30 public comment period. Sorry, I didn't mention that at the beginning of the meeting, but that will be a hard stop. And then following that, we'll have some discussion from the task force. So with the task force. So I'll go ahead and introduce Dr. Krista Court. She's an associate professor of regional economics, and she's the director of the Economic Impact Analysis Program at the University of Florida's Food and Resource Economics Department. And we're really excited to introduce Krista. She'll be talking again about the Composite Red Tide Vulnerability Index. Go ahead, Krista. Welcome.
All right, thank you, Kate. And can you see the slides okay on your end?
Yeah, that looks great.
All right, perfect. So thank you all for having me today. I'm giving an update on our project. I suppose it's a final update since the project is complete now. We're still trying to get a couple of the outputs approved and publicly available. But we have completed the development of a composite red tide vulnerability index. As we were tasked with assessing and communicating vulnerability of coastal communities to red tide in Florida. While you are hearing from me today, we had quite a large project team, so I feel a little bit like a figurehead with a very large team behind me that made this project possible. So we had a group that was providing expertise in the area of economics, since we were focused on socioeconomic vulnerability. Some that had expertise in GIS, or specifically web-based geovisualization, so that we could visualize this index when we were finished. Specializations in geography or vulnerability science, as well as science communication, to make sure that we developed something useful and usable at the end of this project, and not just something that made sense to us academics and wasn't able to be used anywhere. I do always like to acknowledge funding, and this is actually a third project, I believe, maybe fourth project related to different types of harmful algal blooms, mostly red tide work. But we've had good fortune to have funding on that, where we had a good base of research in the socioeconomic impacts of red tide in order to base our work on measuring socioeconomic vulnerability to red tide. So I do appreciate the funding from all of those sources as well. We also had a project advisory committee. So in the domains that we were tasked with, we tasked ourselves with making sure that we included in the vulnerability index. And there were a few that we felt like we didn't have the correct or enough science expertise. So we made sure to plug those gaps in our project advisory committee, as well as have members of that project advisory committee that represented different stakeholder groups that may be interested in using the information from the vulnerability index, again, to ensure that we developed something useful and usable by the end of the project. And so I'd like to thank them as well. Just to give a little bit of background on, how, if we were focused on measuring socioeconomic impacts of red tide events for so long, what led us to this idea to create a vulnerability index. There's a lot of prior research by our project team and others with a growing literature on socioeconomic impacts of red tide events in Florida. They've looked at impacts to things like commercial fishing, aquaculture, property values, tourism, other types of recreational activities. And many of those studies were activity or location or event specific. And when I say event specific, I don't just mean red tide specific, but a specific red tide event, as opposed to looking across all red tide events. The research has not really yet yielded a framework for consistent comparable measurement of socioeconomic impacts across events. I often talk about hurricanes in the same way, where I say each hurricane is very different and it doesn't impact human activity in the same way. Harmful algal blooms are the same. So it takes a little bit more effort to collect data and measure socioeconomic impacts just right, so that you can do that in a consistent, comparable way across events. And it also hasn't yet yielded a framework to assess socioeconomic vulnerability to red tide events. And that was the gap that we were trying to fill with this project. So in the project, we developed a composite red tide vulnerability index, and you'll hear me say CRTVI for most of the rest of this presentation. That's what I'm talking about. Where we attempted to quantify that socioeconomic vulnerability of coastal counties to red tide events in Florida. This was to in part raise awareness of socioeconomic vulnerability to red tide events, and also to inform decision-making related to a lot of what we just heard, different ways that we're going to be able to prepare for or mitigate or prevent the negative socioeconomic impacts of red tide events in the future. The way that the project was set up was in part to actually develop the CRTVI, and then also to develop a visualization platform to share the information on the CRTVI, and development of a communication toolkit that we can use and others can use in order to share the information about the CRTVI and the visualization platform. So if I step through the project on those three, the first thing that we had to do was metric selection and refinement. So there's a lot of different metrics that we could include that have something to do with socioeconomic vulnerability to red tide events. We completed a scoping literature review to identify metrics of interest across 4 domains. Those domains were public health, tourism, fisheries and marine activity, and socioeconomic vulnerability. So we were looking specifically for literature that showed a connection between any of these domains and red tide events, or in the context of socioeconomic vulnerability, showed a connection between socioeconomics and any type of hazard events. And then as part of that, we wanted to dive a little bit deeper. It wasn't a component of the project necessarily, but we do have now an ongoing effort to complete a more detailed systematic literature review in collaboration with UF libraries that we hope to complete and publish as an additional output of the project. Second, we went through a process of collecting information and input from our advisory committee, as well as additional experts and stakeholders. We held 4 virtual focus groups with domain-specific experts. One of those focus groups was with our project advisory committee to assess those metrics of interest that we identified in the literature review, and then to identify any additional metrics of interest and potential data sources for those metrics of interest, to ensure that we weren't missing anything just because it hadn't been published in the academic or the gray literature yet. After all of that process was complete, we ended up with 30 metrics that were selected for inclusion in the CRTVI. Those are across the 4 domains that I mentioned: the public health, fisheries and marine activity, tourism, and socioeconomic vulnerability. And then we had an additional domain that measured actual red tide exposure as a component of the vulnerability index. And I'm not going to go through and read all 30 metrics here, but we will be able to share these slides, and you can see the different metrics in the documentation for the project. In the data collection and processing step of the project, where it was possible, we tried to stick to publicly available data for the metrics to facilitate future updating of the CRTVI, as well as to allow for generalization to other coastal regions of the US that might be impacted by red tide events. I mentioned all things are different. I wouldn't suggest generalizing this to other types of harmful algal blooms, because we've learned from our past research that different types of harmful algal blooms impact human activity in different ways. So I would expect the same thing to be true for socioeconomic vulnerability, but it at least provides a starting point for the process to go through. Data were collected for the years 2021 and 2022 because those were the most recent years where most of those 30 metrics were available. In some cases, there are data for a more recent year, and in other cases, there were not. So we wanted to try to stay as consistent as possible. One exception is the data for that domain of red tide exposure that I mentioned, which captures a longer period of record because we wanted to look at repeated exposure over time as one metric of vulnerability. Most metrics were normalized to ensure that the metrics in the CRTVI would not all simply be volume measures that were strongly correlated with total population, since we're looking at socioeconomic vulnerability. Several of the metrics in the socioeconomic vulnerability domain, such as things like GDP per capita, were inverted to ensure that when we put them all together at the end, the higher numerical values correspond to greater vulnerability, and that we didn't have to say, well, that's true for some variables and not true for all variables. It's just easier to interpret if we invert those that were not. Final data pre-processing task was to do what we call min-max standardization of each individual metric to ensure that each metric was on the same scale. And then the results are for each metric are on a scale from 0 to 1, where 0 corresponds to the minimum value, meaning the least vulnerability, and 1 corresponded to the maximum value and the greatest vulnerability. Once we had the metrics and the data processed for everything, we needed to develop the actual index. So again, we went through a data collection, cleaning, and processing for all those metrics that I just spoke about. We had, again, a round of expert and stakeholder input that was gathered on weighting. So there are 2 types of weighting that are going on. You noticed when I showed the slide with 30 individual metrics across those 4 domains. We can weight metrics within the domain, so which ones we think are more important for measuring socioeconomic vulnerability to specifically to red tide events within each domain, and then there's an additional weighting that goes on across the domains for their inclusion in the final CRTBI metric. We then applied those final weighting schemes to the CRTBI domains and metrics, and we limited our quantification of CRTBI to coastal counties. So some, if not all of the metrics are available for inland counties, but the inland counties have such low exposure or zero exposure to red tide themselves. They are connected to those coastal counties through economics though, but we wanted to limit the quantification for now to coastal counties to be clear that we were focused on them because we did not measure those indirect socioeconomic effects to include for the inland counties. So if we take a very brief look at the results, there's a lot more information on the dashboard for those that are interested. We see that the darker colors on the map that you're seeing here indicates a higher vulnerability, again, on that scale from 0 to 1. You see that counties in Southwest Florida, where red tide exposure has traditionally been most frequent, are the most vulnerable to the socioeconomic impacts of red tide events. Some panhandle counties that often get exposed to red tide via weather events or ocean currents are also highly vulnerable to the socioeconomic impacts of red tide events. And then we saw counties in the Big Bend region of the West Coast, as well as along the East Coast, remain vulnerable to the socioeconomic impacts of red tide, even when their exposure over time has been less frequent. Slide advancing doesn't want to work. This is looking at the 6 different indices that are available in the visualization dashboard. So on the bottom right, you're seeing the map that you just saw on the previous slide where everything is put together in that composite red tide vulnerability index. But the other 5 are showing the vulnerability index for each of the domains that I mentioned. So public health, those fisheries and marine activities, red tide exposure, the socioeconomic vulnerability and tourism. And you can see that there's a lot of variation across these domains. So when we put it all together in the CRTBI, it's taking all of those things, but had we tweaked the weights a little bit, or if you're interested in impacts to a particular domain, that's available to be viewed in the visualization dashboard. Say you're working on specifically fisheries management, you may get a slightly different result for vulnerability if you looked at that one component index as opposed to the composite red tide vulnerability index. The second component of the project was development of a visualization platform. So we went through a complete WebGIS design to share this information in the best way that we saw possible. And the project team, along with the project advisory committee, assessed the advantages and the disadvantages of 3 different types of WebGIS platforms that are available through ArcGIS Online, which we had access to both at the University of Florida and for use when we pass it off to Florida FWC. Those were the dashboard, something more like a hub site, and then a web app builder. Through those conversations, we selected the dashboard as the best way to communicate this information for 3 main reasons. One, that it offers concise and straightforward data visualization that enhances user engagement. And if everyone remembers correctly, a lot of us got used to using dashboards when we were going through the COVID-19 pandemic, trying to visualize a lot of data related to public health at that time. Second, it can be seamlessly integrated with other ArcGIS products or embedded in websites. And we had interest along the way of others trying to help us disseminate this information at the end of the project. So it will support that process. And then third, it features a more user-friendly interface that's accessible to users that have minimal GIS expertise. That you don't have to be an expert in GIS in order to poke around on the dashboard and get information. We had a mock-up dashboard that was designed to demonstrate our proposed user interface, anticipated functionalities, and we presented that to our advisory committee and the full project team for feedback and further refinement. And then the final dashboard in the ArcGIS platform underwent usability testing as a component of the project. So we had individuals that were potential users of the dashboard in either government agencies or academia or some other organizations that participated in a process to, ask them questions and see if they could figure out the answers to them and see how intuitive the dashboard was. And then we refined the dashboard one more time based on the results of that usability testing. So this is just a screenshot of the main board that you'll see. I have learned over the years not to try to do a live demo of things like a visualization platform on Zoom or Teams or any of these, but I do have a QR code at the top of this slide, as well as at the end for this. It goes to the temporary University of Florida hosted version of the composite red tide vulnerability index. Ultimately, the output of the project will be an FWC hosted website, so we will try to make sure that those get the QR code and our links get forwarded to that final staging place once it is ready. But if you go to that, you'll see a splashboard once you welcoming you to the dashboard. And once you click away from that, you'll see a couple different things that allow you to click through and view some of this information. So in the top left, you're able to select either the composite red tide vulnerability index, which is the default, or those domain specific indices that I mentioned earlier to view in the map. You can then select a county if you're interested in seeing some information or the values of the index that you're viewing for a specific county. You can do that. You have some information on the guide to the indices, as well as some links to the data sources to make sure that it was clear where we were getting this information and what, if anything, that we've done in order to prepare those data. And then at the bottom, you can toggle the display between the map or the visualization or the data table. And the data table should be downloadable if you're interested in having that for these different domain-specific indices or the CRTVI at the county level. And the final component of the project was the development of a communication toolkit. So there's two components to this toolkit, and the one that you're seeing off to the right here is something that we prepared for a previous project, just to give you an idea of what these might look like. But we were going to have issue guides, two different issue guides, one that explains some of the basic questions about the CRTVI. What is a vulnerability index in general? How was the CRTVI developed? And then the second one is more, what should we do with this information? Who should be using the CRTVI? Where should they use it? When should they use it? And how can or should the CRTVI be used and why? So it gives it a little bit of context for what this type of information can be used for. And then we'll develop two guidance documents, one specific to policymakers and one specific to academic researchers, that contains some of the information similar to what you'll find in the issue guides, but some additional information for those audiences so that they understand what are the main takeaways for that audience from this project. In terms of next steps, projects finished, but you're never quite finished with them, even when you stop spending money on them. So we're trying to get through the approvals and the public dissemination of the CRTVI project outputs. But then our goal as a project team is to continue disseminating information about the CRTVI to a variety of audiences. My particular faculty position is in both research and extension, so it's my job to communicate the outputs of my research beyond the walls of the university. So we have plans already to continue presenting. We just got back also from Maine presenting this work at the US HAB Symposium, and we have a few other scheduled presentations for academic or government or NGO audiences, as well as getting the information out to the general public. And then again, as a project team, we're just going to continue to explore opportunities to use an interdisciplinary and community engaged approach to assessing and translating the information on the socioeconomic impacts of harmful algal blooms. And that's all I have. These are the two QR codes. The one at the bottom goes to that CRTVI dashboard again, and the one at the top goes to our programs page, that sort of the parent page or the landing page for all of our harmful algal bloom research. So you'll find this and the outputs of other work that are sort of, I say it's under construction because we're getting them all wrapped up and getting them onto the web pages. So you check back over time for additional information. And that's my email if you have any questions on what was presented or as you're poking around on the dashboard. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Krista. That was awesome. I have a few questions, but before I ask mine, I'll just open it up to the task force to see if there are any questions out there. And as I wait for people to kind of think about, oh, Barb has a question. Go ahead, Barb.
Really not a question, just a comment for those of you who weren't part of this project. I know we've all been probably part of many advisory committees, advisory groups. They come under sort of a different name. I have to give Krista and her team credit. They worked us. They worked us hard. And it was a pleasure to actually be part of the project. And, you know, a lot of times I think we feel like we're there in name only, and we were not. We were put to work. So congratulations on that.
Thanks, Barb.
Great feedback. I will ask my question. I think hurricanes are kind of fresh in our mind, and you mentioned that as another example where these sort of stochastic or episodic impacts can just present challenges in terms of each event is kind of unique. And I was just wondering how you control for things like hurricane impacts with a red tide event also happening. And just as an example, I know that the red tide information that you looked at spanned a long time frame, but 2021 was a particularly bad bloom year, and then 2022 we had Hurricane Ian hit. So just to kind of put some context into my question as well.
Yeah, and so Kate, I think it's not explicitly controlled for in the vulnerability index because we're just identifying the metrics that are related to making a place vulnerable. We may consider how often they're exposed to additional hazard events as another domain in the future, though, because that's going to trigger some changes, especially in that socioeconomic vulnerability domain. But in the process of metric selection, when we were going through the literature review to identify the metrics where past studies have been able to associate socioeconomic impacts with a red tide event, many of them have had to control for that. So it's almost like it's indirectly controlled for through the metric selection process, because we know even if we control for the hurricanes, we still found an effect of the red tide event on a particular metric as part of that literature review process. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, it does. I think it is really interesting to think about, having had now hurricanes, like we're still recovering from Ian, and then we just had some other hurricanes where the sort of peak impacts were in slightly different areas geographically, but still well within the sort of red tide impact area. So again, kind of thinking about how these things may come together to unfortunately probably present greater socioeconomic risk at times. So, but yeah, I appreciate that concept of, every bloom and every storm is a little bit different. We definitely struggle with that in the bloom world too. There's a question that was asked at the HAB meeting, and I thought maybe it would be helpful to just ask that question again. But I know that a lot of the work and the metrics are available at the county level. Do you see any opportunities to work at a smaller spatial scale?
Yeah, some of the metrics are available at a smaller spatial scale, so it's certainly possible for those. Not all 30 of them are, but I don't know, it would be interesting to see, what we think we lose if we have to narrow the metric list down to work at a smaller geographic scale. Do we still feel like it's a composite measure across all the domains, or do we need to work at, one domain first because it has more data available? I don't know. I don't have the list in front of me to know which ones were, but we worked at the county. We wanted to work at a smaller scale for the project, but we worked at the county level to make sure that we could include all of the metrics of interest at this point.
Thank you so much. I'm not seeing any other hands raised, so let's go ahead and thank Krista for her presentation. Thanks so much, Krista. Okay, it is my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Yonggang Liu. He is the director of the Ocean Circulation Lab at the University of South Florida College of Marine Science, and he's going to be presenting some work that he and his team have been doing, developing a physical biological model of Crania brevis red tide for the West Florida shelf. So thank you for presenting today, and take it away.
Thank you, Kate. Do you see my screen?
Yeah, it looks great.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I'll talk about how our work funded by FDRI on developing the coupled physical biological model for red tide. This is really teamwork. So many people get involved during this 18-month time period. Also, this work funded by FDRI, but we leverage other several funding agencies projects. Without all of them, it's impossible to get this complicated system set up. We maintain coordinated coastal ocean observing and modeling component for the Western Shelf, try to better understand the ocean circulation and their applications. Red tide is one of them. So the observing component consists of right now currently with 4 surface buoys and 3 subsurface moorings mirror these meteorological and oceanographic data sets. And for surface buoys, we data transferred to our lab near real time. Yeah, but the subsurface buoys moorings are in delay time. We recovered a couple of times a year. So the model part, we have delivered 2 modeling systems. The primary one is the West Florida Coastal Ocean Circulation Model. We call it WFCOM. The other is a more, it's very high resolution, focused on Tampa Bay area. We call it Tampa Bay Coastal Ocean Model, TBCOM. So both systems are right now running automatically every day, providing realistic forecast of the ocean circulation in this region. The model has been tested again and again in multiple peer-reviewed publications using the data. So we consider this established model. So not something new. The model has been developed for more than 10 years. So with this model output of ocean circulation, we were able to make it use this to track our HAB cells once the bloom occurred. This is an example of today's model product. Okay, trajectory, short-term forecast of HAB trajectories. And this is only shows Tampa Bay area, but our model domain covers the entire Western Shelf. We have developed 5 such sub-region products, starting from Florida Panhandle down south to Florida Keys. So go to our website. You can see the current status and trajectory forecast for different regions. So today's output, you can see the different flow directions of near surface, which the left panel shows surface trajectory. Subsurface trajectory shows to the left. The coastal ocean circulation is fully 3-dimensional. So surface current and surface material could be transported out of Tampa Bay and elevated to the first in this case. But southern part is near subsurface part still elevated in a different direction. The cells, low concentration cells, have been elevated Tampa Bay. So this work has been published last year in a peer-reviewed journal, but the work has been done for a long time. Yeah, we started this work for almost 10 years now. We use this product. It's actually, besides this state, if the WI regularly use that in a status report, also local counties use that for dead fish collection and other applications. There's a lot of online users. I just give example of in 2023, the spring break season. Within 30 days, 1 month, so more than 48,000 users are tracked by our Google Analytics. This is a free service by Google, from Google. If I plot that same time series using daily time series, you can see the peak day. There's more than 4,000 users in 1 day. And if further shows more detail in hourly time series, you can see more than 40 users per hour in the peak time. So those corresponding to the days of spring break in year 2000. People from all over the US, mainly from European, I'm not sure from other countries. For US spring break, people come back to Florida, enjoy their time in the beach. Yeah, they worry about this stuff. If you take a look at the hourly peaks in the early morning, that means every day, starting in the morning, to check our website and look for red tide information. Which part of the beach could be hit by the red tide. So it's very useful. However, these products simply based on the ocean current, circulation, advection, transport, no active biology included. So the simple biological information would be 5 different levels of concentration, cell abundance. That's it. No active biology. So we got funded by FRI to develop this coupled physical biological model based on the established West Florida coastal ocean circulation model. So we already have a very good physical model, now add a biological component to it. And the goal is to couple both physical and biological models within one framework, based on this WFCON framework, and apply this coupled model to study some case study for 2018 event, and also we had some time to take a look at 2021 event, early stage part of that event. That's very long. That's the worst case in recent years. Yeah, the coupled physical biology model is, first part is based on the ocean circulation part. I showed you the upper left column part. Yeah, we use for the meteorological data set from NOAA NAM model, wind, heat flux, and also including tides, river runoff. The purpose is to provide realistic simulation of the ocean circulation. So the current, temperature, salinity, and other variables will be used to drive this generalized ecosystem model. And it's complicated. It could be very complicated, but we also try to simplify it, just using a configured, just have 2 phytoplankton species. One's diatom, the other is Corynebarius species, and it's very simplified manner. So nutrients involved, so you can see all the different functional groups in this system. We need all those initial conditions and ambient concentration for different variables. So we don't have most of them, I would say. So we take all those from previous publications, particularly previous red tide modeling work by USF scientists, retired Jiang Wash group. They have done a lot of work over the years in collaboration with our lab for many years. We provide ocean circulation, they develop the biological part. But that group has been dismissed after the retirement of Dr. Jiang Wash. So we read their papers carefully and take all this information from their peer-reviewed publications. So get all this information into our model. So this simple application for 2018 balloon event. We started with offshore initial field of low concentration cells, more located on between 30 and 40 meter isobars, and also existing coastal patch where we're starting from the September, which already balloons already started. So we simulated for 3 months. We see this comparison between model and the data. Show data first. The FRI database of cell concentration for September. The first 2 weeks of September and second 2 weeks of September, and also for October in the bottom. So you can see that the modeled bloom pattern compares well with this observed cell counts for the main bloom patch located from Tampa Bay, latitude Tampa Bay to Charlotte Harbor region, and even for those higher concentration, the patterns compares pretty well. So we the model here for this comparison is almost apple to apple, because we convert this model simulated concentration to the same 5 levels as shown by this the very tight product with FRI had a standard for that. So also make a comparison with satellite derived coronavirus bloom pattern. So this the first one is satellite product. That satellite product is limited to more of binary products, shows the patch, the area where the bloom concentration is greater than 100,000 cells per liter. So they don't have this high concentration. But anyway, the general location of the bloom patterns, we can see our model compares well with satellite. Yeah, the center part, the middle part panel is in-situ observations. So here is a movie shows the surface pattern evolution during this simulation time period. You can see the surface bloom first occurred. You will see another cycle is starting from the entire westward coast, yeah, Tampa Bay to Charlotte Harbor region, and transported down south and dissipated away over time. And also in this 40-mile region, coastal region, you see this coastal nuke area have relatively higher concentration that for more vegetation in that area. So with these results, you can see it's consistent with the previous finding, basically primarily on physical oceanography modeling. So the southward advection and also so also starting from development. So the cells both near shore and existing and new from offshore that contribute to that event and southward advection and dissipation effect. If we show this in 3-dimensional movie, you probably see better the cells at the subsurface, but they're not very fully in 3D. I know it's model visualization, so always can be improved. Yeah, see the offshore cells have been transported to near shore and elevate south and then dissipated over time. Yeah, let's repeat it again. Let's see one more time. Yeah, at the surface level, surface pattern, you cannot see this subsurface bloom. Now you see that it's coming from offshore. Yeah, I will stop here. Another application is a very preliminary results investigation of 2022-2021 event. more focused on the initiation part. It's very challenging. We'll see. Okay, this case in by the end of 2020, the balloon was started to occur near down south in the Fort Myers region. We use where's come from? So, most of the time we hypothesize that the offshore shells could be located more between 40 meters as a best offshore from Tampa Bay latitude of that part of the western shelf. But this balloon, it seems like it's not initiated from that area. So we use log-length trajectory handcuffs to determine roughly where it's come from. So we simulate based handcuff simulation, ocean circulation, and we release the virtual drifters near bottom. We track where to go, where these drifters would go. So by following these trajectories at different times of releasing, we determine that the initial area of this balloon could be from this yellow area, highlighted yellow colors, this offshore patch. So we started from there and simulate this event for 3 months and see what we're gonna see what look like. This the pattern after 2 months of simulation. You can see that okay, we observed very high concentration of cells by the end during the last 2 weeks of December. Our model shows the concentration of more of median level is not very high concentration level. Okay, it's really challenging. A lot of stuff may be still missing in the model, but the balloon pattern also seems like be a bit too large. Yeah, I forgot to mention the 3 panels. The middle panel shows the model concentration in the 5 levels, which is identical to the observation. The 5 levels used for this FRI product. So from very low concentration, a medium, and a high concentration, high level of balloon. So the very right column we shows model simulated cell concentration in continuous color bar. It's not just 5 discrete color bar. Okay, this will provide more detailed information. Okay, based on same information actually. Now you can see more detailed structures and patterns. If we compare that with the satellite images, which is not really very tight, it's more chlorophyll concentration, you can see that okay, yeah, high concentration blooms located in that corner of Fort Myers coastal area. That's we see that in the model, but it seems that the model the bloom is way larger than this satellite was shown in satellite images. So it's not that easy. Okay, the initiation part. So for so we choose to start from here. We limited this initial existing plume to a very coastal area instead of from the entire, the big plume. So we start from here, January, which is the end of December, start from here by trimming the initial condition, initial patch from the nearshore, only retain the nearshore part of the patch. And also we continue to release from offshore subsurface layer. And then we simulate another 3 months from January to March. So yeah, this what shows in early of January was observed. We started from early January for this simulation. We'll see what it look like later on. Yeah, so by later in February, you see the observation and the model. The left panel shows the observation, and right 2 panels show models. the center one is on the same scale with the observation, but the right column shows continuous concentration level. So that's a difference. But in general, in this case, yeah, compared, it's pretty good. I mean, the concentration is mostly in the low level, a little bit medium level. So by March, so about 2 months later, no, 3 months, you see the balloon elevated to the north, but in relatively lower concentration, and also spread out to the south. And the concentrations still underestimated in this case. Yeah. So if we compare this to satellite images, the pattern, we see that, yeah, the balloon, it seems that the model this time, yeah, captured the balloon coastal balloon pattern pretty nicely, I would say. Yeah. And also a little bit higher, I mean, the median level concentration cell counts showed up in our model. And this another comparison with satellite images on in February. Yes, the balloon more limited to the coastal band right now. Yeah, it's not. We didn't see those huge offshore expanded balloon in our model anymore. Yeah, it's very difficult. I want to repeat again. We stopped here for this simulation, but we could do a lot more in this 2021 event. We didn't quite get to the summer yet. We know a lot to do, but this project, yeah, only 18 months. What they can do, achieve in 18 months, starting from developing the biological module and coupled with physical model. So it's in my mind, it's still a lot of work. So a lot more to do. Oh, sorry. Oh, go backward. Yeah. So this is a brief summary. Yeah, we have developed a coupled physical biological model for the Western Shelf, and we applied that to the 2018 balloon event briefly, and also tried simulate the initiation process of the 2020 and 2021 event. Yeah, of course, there's a lot to do in the future. Our models still need to be improved, for sure. More work needed. Definitely. For example, we could do a lot of process-oriented studies on the balloon initiation, development, and termination processes. We could also include more very tight observations in our models if we really want to make prediction. So initial condition is very important. More accurate initial condition will get more accurate forecast. And we could use other data sets as well, gliders, satellite products in the future. Yeah, and we could also test this coupled model in the event response capacity to help, yeah, in the future. We have some of the preliminary work has been reported in 2024 Ocean Science meeting and recently in the US HAB symposium. One is the oral presentations on the poster, and I also present this the short-term trajectory forecast product in a US HAB symposium as an oral presentation, and submitted 3 abstracts to the Ocean Prediction Symposium. Believe me, 3 different topics, but they choose this very tight forecast product as an oral presentation. The other 2 is assigned as a poster. That will be happening in about 10 days. I'll attend that symposium in France in about 10 days. Yeah, a paper published about the short-term tracking product, and we'll get administered in preparation for this coupled biological model. Yeah. Thank you for your attention. I think that's all for today.
Thanks so much, Youngjing. Let's all thank Youngjing for that awesome presentation. And of course, I have some questions.
Sure.
I see a hand go up immediately from another task force member, so we'll let I believe Barb, I saw your hand go up.
Thank you.
Thanks so
Yeah,
much.
I actually just wanted to do the applause thing. I hit the wrong button.
Thank you, Barb.
That's a great comment to have. Any other questions? I'm not seeing any hands go up. As you are thinking, I'm going to go ahead and ask. Well, I have kind of a comment, but one of the things for this right now, growth is constant. Is that correct? The growth rate that you're using for
Yes.
Carnegie brevis?
So, this way, the growth rate is it also could change over time because it's depend on in this model depend on several different factors. The growth rate not exactly constant, but we didn't consider any for example any growth rate specified you guys identified through data or lab results. Yeah, that could be something we could do in the future. Yeah, definitely worth to explore.
And maybe just to give the task force members, I mentioned IFCBs. I'm not sure that I said what they are, imaging flow cytobots, but they're devices that can autonomously sample approximately every 20-25 minutes and then take images of all the cells in the sample. So we've been using that on ships, but also at fixed locations. And one of the things that we've been able to show, we've done a bunch of dial work in the lab, and we were able to see that cells actually change their biovolumes throughout the day related to asexual division. And so in the field, we're able to use those changes in cell size basically to estimate growth rate. And so we've been able to do that for a few years of IFCB deployments, and we see that we get, growth rates that are very comparable to what we might see in culture. And sometimes we see growth throughout different bloom stages, throughout different times of the year. So that's really interesting. And we also do see sometimes where growth is higher than what we might expect in culture. So being able to take that information back and use it with some of the other types of measurements like nutrient data that we're collecting as part of our routine surveys, hopefully will give us some really good ways to parameterize these models going forward. So it's great to hear about these first iterations though, and to think about the complexity that lies ahead.
Yes, I fully agree with you. Yeah, we could use more those kind of observations. Yeah, FCB determine growth rates during different stage of bloom. Yeah, we could incorporate it in the model in the future. Yeah, a lot more to do.
Great. Okay, let's thank Youngjing one more time. Thanks so
Thank
much
you.
for presenting.
Thank you. Let me see how I can exit from here. So, I'm sure to. I don't want to go stop sharing. Okay, good. Thank you.
So we're going to go ahead and take a 15-minute break. We're going to come back right at 1:55 and start with Dana's presentation. And then again, as a reminder, we have our public comment period at 2:30. So I will see you all back here in now 14 minutes. So thanks again to our speakers and see you soon. Continue with our HAB task force grant presentations. So our next speaker is Dr. Dana Wetzel, and she'll be discussing some of the details from her project, a land-based shellfish depuration mitigation strategy to increase business opportunities and reduce economic losses associated with extended lease closures following red tide exposure. And I noticed that she's got a slightly abbreviated title on her opening slide. And Dana is a senior scientist and program manager at the Moat Environmental Lab for Forensics. So thank you so much for presenting, Dana. Take it away.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me. Yeah, it was a monstrously long name. I'm not sure what I was thinking when I wrote it, but yeah, I shortened it. So thanks for having me again. I am Dana Wetzel, program manager of the Environmental Laboratory for Forensics. And this is my team, Rebecca Medvecki, Christelle Miller, and Tracy Sherwood. And the team members are really responsible for most of the work that comes out of the lab. They're terrific and amazing, and I'm really, really excited to have them. And I'm happy to be here to talk about what we've been doing. So, oops, I just lost. Oops, sorry. Let me do this again. From the beginning, here we go. Okay, do you see me?
We see you, but not your slides are still maybe loading, but they're not. I can't see them yet.
Oh, great. I knew this was going to happen. Let me see if I can try this again. Share here. Did it show before?
It is showing. Yes, this looks good.
Okay, terrific. I think I must have turned off one view. Okay, so.
It was looking good, but then the last thing you did, now we see your presenter mode, so we can see
yeah,
the two-slide view.
Okay, I had this fear this would happen. We had a problem with our PowerPoint on my computer, and I'm actually at home because I couldn't get it to work at work, but I think it's a software issue. So I actually brought my other laptop that has my notes. So let's do it this way. Does that work?
Yeah, this looks great.
Okay, terrific. All right, this will be a little bit slower, and I apologize for that, but just to give you an idea of how this work developed. I wasn't normally a red tide person. I did oil and a whole bunch of other things, but what happened was this work developed from a conversation that I had with some shellfish farmers a few years ago who needed to find some viable solutions to help farmers battling red tide. They were having a lot of economic impact and wondered if I could help come up with some ideas to, tools for them to be able to use. So this was a challenge. We hadn't done this before, but so my team and I got together and we did some conceptualizing, some designing, and wrote a proposal that incorporated two things in it. And the first one was the development of a red tide toxin biosensor. And the second was assessing the feasibility of depuration as a mitigation strategy. We met with the shellfish farmers. The farmers thought these were two really useful tools. So we submitted this proposal to NOAA and to the USDA the program of food safety and defense for funding, and actually both of them picked us up. So what happened was NOAA funded the generation of antibodies that were needed to make the biosensor, but they also funded a pilot study on depuration, and that one was really, really important. But the USDA funded the biosensor prototype development. USDA thinks that this is kind of a big deal here in Florida, and they were really interested in having tools for these farmers to use. So we were grateful to them for funding us. We did all of our exposure work out at the Moat Laboratory Red Tide Mitigation and Technology Facility out at MAP, the one that Kevin described, the one you guys have seen over and over again. And in there are 12 in this room that we were using, the raceway room. We have 12 400-liter raceways that can be run as flow through, or they can be run as static renewal. The room is temperature control, the water's temperature control. Depuration, you can see an image of what the depuration design looks like. It's a recirculating system, and it has a biofilter or solids filtration. It also has a carbon filter to remove toxins, and then it has a UV sterilizer. The red tide that we use in the exposures is cultured out at the facility, and we appreciate them very much for providing that for us. So I'm just going to talk to you a bit about what we did and what we saw in our pilot. First of all, FWC very graciously said they would analyze our end of uptake samples by ELISA and by MBA for the pilot study. We didn't think about having an end of depuration sample analyzed for MBA at the time. Just learning how this whole system and trying to figure out how to respond to or anticipate questions, and we missed that one. But nonetheless, what we did is we were really rather, interested in looking at all the species that the farmers thought were important, and that included hard clams, oysters, and sunray Venus clams. We exposed them in this study. All of the parameters of the study and some of the results are over in the graph on the left-hand side of the slide. For the sunrays, it took about 3.5 days to uptake enough toxin to get to 3 ppm, and it took about 6 days for the hard clams to get up that high. I'm sorry, it was 3.6 and 3.1. So by MBA, though, when we had the samples analyzed, although we thought we were at a level that was toxic, the MBA showed that unfortunately we were under the lower limit of less than 20 mouse units. It was a little bit disappointing, but nonetheless, when we ran the ELISAs on this, if we were judging this based on ELISA only, we would definitely have been above on the uptake and below or meeting the threshold for regulatory limits on the depuration. However, with the oysters, we measured 4.6 ppm with our ELISA, with the Marbianca ELISA, for the uptake after 3.5 days, and 1.8 with 2.5 days of depuration. and the MBA confirmed at least that we had reached 37 mouse units. Again, we didn't have the depuration MBA done. So that was, I think, we were really excited that on our first foray, we were getting some reasonable results. We wanted to take a look at, because we had the data, you know, and we were watching them eat and they seemed to eat differently. We were wondering about their rate of uptake versus rate of depuration. So for sun rays and hard clams, the uptake part is in blue and depuration's in green. You can see that on the screen. The depuration rate was faster than the uptake rate, but we saw something different from the oysters. And for the oysters, we actually had two separate depurations. One that had us feeding the oysters through depuration, and the other was not feeding. And with feeding, we saw that the shellfish offloaded the toxins 42% faster than without feeding. So it was sort of an interesting side experiment. The farmers may not have preferred to invest the money in feeding during depuration, but it seems as though feeding increases the rate of depuration. So it's probably something that we are going to recommend if this, you know, goes on or goes further. So the results from the pilot study seemed promising, but we wanted to better validate this as a potential mitigation strategy. So we applied to the FWC HAB grant program. And thank you, we were really thrilled to have been selected, and allowed us to do a whole lot more. So with this FWC HAB grant funded project, our task, or our tasks, were to evaluate the potential of using depuration to mitigate red tide toxins in contaminated shellfish to help support the farmers getting their product back to market as soon as possible. The exposure studies, theoretically, in conversation with FWC, we thought that a 4 ppm level measured by ELISA would be a good place to start on targeting to get our shellfish to that body burden concentration. But yeah, after doing all these, good luck actually targeting specifically, because it's not an easy task. Tissue and culture samples were analyzed every day by mode throughout the study using the Mar-Bianc and Abraxas ELISAs. We were interested in kind of comparing how those two work together just because we could. And then by using LCMS-MS, looking at individual brevetoxins. The idea was that FWC would analyze our samples at the end of the uptake and depuration periods this time by MBA to see if we could prove that we have effectively offloaded toxins to below that regulatory limit of minus 20 mouse units. So our results hopefully are going to begin the conversation with the ISSC for potential consideration as an approved mitigation strategy for farmers. One other task that we had is that we were going to do a shelf life assessment to ensure that adding a depuration component and adding to the time before harvest wasn't going to impact the tissue quality of the shellfish. And the last task of the project is to carry out a field demonstration at a farmer's facility to make sure that they can actually do this on site. So, there we are, and there we are, and there we are. Okay, so this is the analytical part of the project that I just kind of wanted to give highlights of. The tissue and water samples were analyzed by the Marbianc and Abraxas ELISAs and by LCMS-MS, as I said. The brevetoxins, individual ones that we were monitoring are listed on the right. Those are the ones that we have standards for. And we, after doing all or gathering all the data, we did a correlation analysis of the Marbianc versus Abraxas, and Marbianc and LCMS, and Abraxas and LCMS, and the correlation was pretty significant. It was a P of 0.05. So we felt pretty comfortable with doing all three of those. Okay, now, this is just a joke. I'm keeping the graphs in this presentation simple. And the reason I wanted to tell you about the correlations first is that I'm not going to put all these data points in every one of the graphs because it gives me a headache, and I'm sure it would you as well. And so I just wanted to remind you that the correlations are significant. So I am just going to focus on the Marbianc for the results for the tissue. Ta-da, and that's what that is. Much simpler. So this is our first exposure study. We started off very ambitious, wanting to do 3 species at once. The test conditions for each of these tests are on the left-hand side. So you can see, what the animals were, what the strain of red tide was, what the concentration was, and if it was a flow through or a constant exposure. Each of them had, when there was a depuration, had the same depuration that didn't change. So at the very top of the page is the daily composition and concentration of the culture that we used for BTX. And as you can see, it's pretty variable from day to day. There's that trying to grow red tide and understand how it behaves is, so far beyond me, but I thought at least we could document, analytically the concentrations, and as you can see, it's pretty different. Let's talk about the oysters first. For the oysters, it took 10 days to reach a level of 5.2 ppm with ELISA, and our daily average culture concentration of the exposure solution was really only 180 ppb. It took 1.5 days to depurate to 1 ppm. So all was good with the oysters, and we were ready to send our bulk tissue samples off to FWC for the MBA analyses, but they require at least 200 grams of tissue in order to do this. Well, when we shucked our oysters, we found they were little bitty oysters, and they were so small we didn't have enough tissue to send to FWC to confirm. So it was very sad news. With the 2 clam species, while we initially had fairly good toxin uptake over the first 8 to 9 days to over 2 ppm, suddenly the concentrations dropped significantly over the next 12 days. On day 12, we were looking at the microscope, counting red tide cells in the tanks, and we noticed that we had little baby clams. So, and it appears that both species spawned, likely on day 9. By day 24, and you can see that spike, and then it starts to decline. By day 24, the clams finally increased to at least 3 ppm, but we had to give up. We were running out of culture, and at the same time, we were getting evicted from the raceways because someone else needed them. So we put them directly into depuration just because, and that was the end of this. It was not a really productive exposure study for the clam, although it's really interesting that it does seem that spawning is a really effective way to offload toxins. Anyway, what all this meant was from the first exposure study, we have to repeat everything. So from our previous pilot exposures, we knew that we could do a whole lot better in getting more rapid body burden concentrations in a shorter period of time. But after assessing the daily BTX concentrations through LCMS, as I said on the last slide, we saw that there's a whole lot of variations in concentrations of total toxin in the exposure culture. That makes a big difference. The top graph is the graph that I showed previously from the last exposure. And it also happens to have Abraxas ELISA just to because we were measuring ELISA at the same time with the Abraxas, just see that correlation. And this was the Wilson strain, and as I said, it was 180 ppb. The toxins here were pretty low as compared with other strains and other ages of cultures that we had analyzed. The second graph, it actually came from our experiment 4 that I'm going to discuss shortly. We got smarter as it went along, and we started selecting by strain and by culture age, and we have actually been monitoring a week before an exposure study starts just to make sure that we're actually developing enough toxins that it isn't going to take forever and too much culture to be able to get them hot. So this experiment, the second graph shows that our average concentrations ended up being 1146 ppb. It was an older strain of the an older culture of the Manatee or Minnesota strain. So, we're looking at these differences, and, it's almost like, a roll of the dice as to what you get when you, ask for culture to be grown, because, nobody's there is monitoring toxins, but that's our job. So we approached this from a toxicological perspective, and we were wondering if it were possible if we could extract large amounts of toxin from an optimized culture, then determine the concentration, blow it down, get it concentrated, ampulate it, and freeze it so there'd be a qualitative and quantitative concentrated toxin source. This would give us consistent exposure levels. It would, at least in total toxins, maybe not in the exact composition, but if you had a resource like that, you could share this amongst other labs and do some comparative exposure studies. We thought this would be a really brilliant idea if we could pull it off. It seemed to work well with our short study of 5 days. That's all we were able to do it in. We did it in 6 20-gallon aquaria, duplicates of 3 tanks for each species. The uptake was for each of the species, surprisingly, was really similar. We haven't seen that before using live culture. So a great idea, but to make the amount of extract that we needed just to carry out this 5-day study in 20-gallon tanks we had to lyse and extract culture. We had to do it 32 liters of culture to be able to get that. Maybe 32 liters is not a lot to some people if they have a different sort of an extraction system, but ours was a little tiny manifold. It took forever. We calculated it would take 6 months to have us be able to extract the culture need to do 1 exposure study. But if someone could do it on a larger scale, it may be feasible and easier than working with live culture. So we thought that was something to put on, the back burner. So the next study we had, the third exposure study, we did with oysters and hard clams. We got them shipped to us from Cedar Key, Florida. No Sunray Vetus clams have been available. We've looked around, we've asked. For the time being, they're not out there as far as the farmers have been able to tell us. So the top graph, once again, is the average concentration of the brevetoxins analyzed by LCMS over the whole study time period. And this time we were at an average of 509 ppb, almost 3 times higher than the first study. The test conditions, once again, are on the left side of the screen. For the oysters, it took 26 days to reach 5.8 ppm ELISA, and 5 days of depuration to reach 1.5 ppm. That's a long, extended time, in our opinion. Bulk samples were sent to FWC for MBA analysis, and what we saw is that the uptake samples were well above the 20 mouse units. We were at 34.6 when we, after depuration, the depuration samples were below the less than 20 mouse units. So we felt that that was a great successful study, although it was a bit long. For the hard clams, 31 days of constant exposure to 2 million cells per liter. Who would think you can't get more than 0.9 ppm accumulated in the tissue? Well, it happened. So we started wondering, although we told everyone that we worked with that you can't refrigerate these shellfish before we work on them, we found out later that yes, indeed, the clams had been refrigerated prior to shipping, and both the clams and the oysters were packed in ice when they got shipped down to us. So we had previously documented that chilling the shellfish significantly impairs their normal filter feeding behavior, suppresses uptake and depuration, and somehow the information didn't get passed along to the right person. Temperature effects not only affected the hard clams, but it seems to suggest that it also affected the oysters. As I said, it was a lot longer than normal uptake for oysters and a lot longer time to depurate below 1.8 ppm. And so we think that was impacted by the low temperature during shipping. However, it was good information, and we got data on the oysters, but we had to redo the study for the clams. So here we go with the third attempt with the hard clams. So this time the clams were picked up directly from the farmer's boat in Palmetto, Florida. They weren't anywhere near refrigeration. I know because I met them on the boat. So this time we thought we were good. Toxin concentrations monitored at the top. This was the graph that I showed you on an earlier slide that showed that we had 1146 ppb exposure over the time period. On day 12 at 3.7 ppm, we were out of culture. Although we wanted to target over 4, we are constrained by the amount of culture that we can ask for. So we grabbed some tissue to archive to send to FWC for the MBA, and then we put the hard clams into depuration, and they successfully depurated to 1.4 ppm within 2 days. So we collected samples and sent those for MBA analysis. just got the results back a few days ago. Thank you, FWC. And the results indicated that we did reach, 41 mass units for the uptake and less than 20 for the depuration. So we had a few hiccups with the hard clams, with spawning and refrigeration, but we were finally able to prove that we could do the depuration at below regulatory limits within a short time, confirmed by ELISA and by the MBA. So the next task was to evaluate shelf life impacts. So we did this for the oysters and for the clams. Once again, the sun rays were not available. 10 of the shellfish were collected at the end of the uptake. We called those our controls. Another 10 at the end of depuration. We called those our impacted shellfish. They were maintained in a 4 degrees C, well-ventilated refrigerator to see if there were any possible effects from the depuration on shelf life. They were monitored daily for gaping, and unresponsiveness when tapped, and any mortalities were documented. So over the monitoring period for the oysters, no gaping was observed. For the hard clams, on day 9 and on day 10, 2 control clams gaped on for the post-depuration or the impacted clams. We had 1 gape on day 9 and 1 on day 10. So I think we can safely say that depuration did not have an effect on the shelf life of the shellfish, at least for 10 days. The last thing that we are doing is a field demonstration. So we've done this in the raceways at Moat. We are going to provide a raceway and filtration components to a farmer collaborator that match what was used at Moat. We're going to use hard clams, and we're going to do an uptake at Moat to get them to as high a level as we can. We're going to then take a subset for MBA analysis. Then we're going to share those clams, the ones remaining, with the farmers to do a simultaneous depuration at the farmer's location, and we're going to do at our location. We're going to monitor toxin concentrations for both depuration activities. And at the end of the depuration, we're going to send samples to FWC for those MBA analyses. So we believe that we're going to be able to show that depuration by farmers at wet storage facilities can be successful. Red tide's really hard on shellfish farmers. Everybody knows that, especially in affected areas who've seen an escalating number of red tide related closures of their farms, and it's resulted in millions of dollars of lost revenue, lost jobs, and has created an economic certainty for these folks. So if we have an approved depuration system that could lower the risk and improve the bottom line for the shellfish industry while still protecting human health, we think this would be a really good thing. We hope to be able to move to the next step in gaining interest and approval from the ISSC. That's hopefully a work in progress soon in the future. And I just want to thank you guys again. This really meant a lot, not only to us, but also to the farming community. So with that, I will take questions.
Thanks so much, Dana. And just as a note, let's thank Dana, and then we are going to pause for public comment at 2:30, and then we'll come back for questions if that's okay.
Okay.
Okay. So we have probably like 10 more seconds before it'll be 2:30. So we can go ahead and descend into that, and we're going to post the call-in number. Okay, so we are going to wait just for a few minutes to see if we get any calls or comments, and then we'll go back to Dana's presentation and our other activities after that. Okay, we have a caller. We are ready for your comment. Area code 239.
Dana Detmar.
Is now joining.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Hi, good afternoon. This is Dana Detmar. I'm with the City of Sanibel's Natural Resources Department. I listen to most of your meetings when I have the time, and I definitely appreciate the initiatives that you all are undertaking. And it's nice to hear the updates from the various working groups that you have. One thing that I was hoping, a potential topic that maybe the communications or the health working group could tackle would be communication between municipalities and the local health departments. In the past, the communications have been inconsistent, and sometimes in events it feels like we can be scrambling to put out alerts or post beaches. To provide an example, in the past, our local health department here has called us and asked us if we wanted the beaches posted, but we don't feel like we're the ones to make that decision. So hoping that there could be some sort of standardization for the health departments across the state of Florida, a standardization of a protocol for how they respond to blooms. And that's all I have. Thank you again for your time.
Thank you very much for your comment, and thank you for listening to these meetings. We appreciate it. Okay, so we are going to move back to questions for Dana, and thank you again, Dana, for your presentation. I have a question, but I'm going to wait and see if the other task force members have questions first. well, I'll go ahead and ask my question, and then if anyone else has any. So I was trying to notice as you went through, it seems like sometimes there's a flow through supply of cells, and at other times it's provided daily. And I was just wondering, have you looked at cell concentrations and or grazing rates as part of your efforts here? It seems like that could provide a lot of information in terms of some of the variability that you're seeing from day to day and across experiments.
Yes, we have done that repeatedly, in depth, every time. And we count cells in the culture. When we're doing when we do a flow through and when we do a static, it's all dependent upon how much culture we have, because we're trying to, with limited culture, sometimes we think, doing a static renewal, provides a more consistent, and sometimes we feel like, a flow through is a better representative. So we kind of juggled back and forth, but it really didn't, how we got them to accumulate wasn't a point of the study. It was just getting them to that point. So we did do cell counts. We do cell counts, as I said, a week beforehand. Every bottle of culture, we would analyze it out at our facility. We'd monitor it, see what the toxin loads were. Obviously we're dosing by the numbers of cells. So as you notice, it's 1 million cells per liter, and that's the dosing rate in the tanks or from the header, 1 million or 2 million cells per liter. But the reality is, and the reason I showed that to you on the screen, is that the culture's toxin levels are different for the same amount of cells per liter. So it's one of those things that's really, really very difficult to anticipate and prepare for, which is why we do as much pre-analytical work before the exposure study as possible, which, if there was a way, if somebody could come up with a way to filter this stuff and we could throw it in the freezer, it could be carried out like I would carry out an oil spill study. Just pull it out of the freezer and you know exactly what's there. But unfortunately, right now we're limited in using live culture. So the variability is not just the culture, it's the age of the culture. And we have tons more data. We didn't have time to show it, but it's like we took a section and we said, okay, give us 8-day culture of this strain. Now we'll take the 9, now we'll take the 10, and that's 8 days from when it was inoculated. Holy cow, the difference in toxin levels is just amazing. So you just try and do the best you can, but there are so many lessons learned. I wanted to put a slide in about that, but I just started working on this talk 2 days ago because we've been out for the hurricane and I didn't have time. But one of the lessons is don't ever think that exposing something by cells is going to be repeatable. It's just not. I see you nodding, Barb.
Go ahead, Barb.
Yeah, a lot of good hard work here presented, and I get the sense that we saw the tip of the iceberg, but maybe I missed it. It sounds as though you're going from culture and mesocosm or raceway to a demonstration, which I presume would be wild culture or wild samples, not culture. So you're going to do culture again?
No. We're providing them a raceway that looks just like the one we have.
Yeah.
We're providing them a filtration that has every component, same brand, same everything that we have. It's going to be done in their wet storage facility. We're going to get them hot.
Okay.
They're going to depurate. We're simply seeing, can the mechanics of depuration be replicated at the farmer's place?
Okay, got it. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Any additional questions for Dana before we thank her one last time? All right, let's thank Dana again. Thanks so much.
Thank you guys. We really appreciate it.
And just as a reminder, we heard about 3 very different topics that have been funded through the grant program. Each of them represents and requires a team of experts and a lot of specialized technical detail and work. I think that these projects have been really successful in terms of diving into challenging topics that do need more than a year of work, and also translate really well to some modeling components that allow us to look backwards and forwards. And so I think that's really awesome and a huge accomplishment. 2 of those projects, the first 2 are complete, and then Dana's project is wrapping up at the end of this year. So again, a great cycle, and that is a great segue for the next part of our meeting today. We are going to descend into some discussion. First, Megan is going to provide just an overview of where we're at with the nutrient state of the science. And then she's going to lead us through an overview of where we're at with progress document number 3 and some of the next steps that we have to accomplish that, and some slate timeline revisions there. So I'm going to hand it over to Megan Abbott.
Okay, thank you, everybody. I'm not turning my camera on because I've been having some sound. If I put on both, I'm probably going to lose sound. So I'm just follow my voice, I guess. I'll share some slides. I want to remind everyone. Let's see, presentation mode. See if I can accomplish this. Apparently not. Oh, well, that's fine. You can see this.
This looks great. Yeah, PowerPoint
Okay.
is just grumpy today, I think.
Yeah, it's grumpy. Okay. So those presentations you saw were part of the Harmful Algal Bloom Grants program cycle from the 2022 to 2024. As you recall, that's the program we established to provide support funding for projects that help forward the HAB Task Force priority recommendations. The next cycle, the task force talked about nutrients, but prior to putting out a call for projects, wanted to host the State of the Science Symposium to identify what the best needs and the best resources of that were to target first. So we saw Lisa Krimsky, UFC grant, who has hosted the past State of the Sciences in Florida for red tide and blue-green algae, as they presented at our last meeting, have been contracted to do this through the HAB Grants program for nutrients in red tide in Florida. And this is just a quick update on that. So the format of this is a little bit different maybe than other State of the Sciences because it is through a grant program. Again, it's for this cycle that's being led by Sea Grant. We're familiar with Lisa and Krimsky and Betty Stogler, who have been doing this already for the state. And they formed 2 groups to help guide the effort, a steering committee and a technical advisory committee, and the members are on here. The steering committee focusing a lot more on the coordination organization of the meeting, and the technical advisory committee focusing on largely the participants and attendees, as well as the culmination of this will result in a white paper that will help identify and guide some of those efforts. So a really good cross-section of agencies and science and environmental organizations, community level. The hurricanes, as everybody else has experienced, sort of put a little bit of a slowdown in the schedule. So that we did manage a steering committee meeting before Helene and identified some clear objectives for the symposium. Those are on. I won't read those for you, but those were the initial points. The TAC has not been able to meet yet, so these will go forward to them for further input. So these are just the initial identified discussion points that have come up from that. and we'll get further input from the Technical Advisory Committee. We are looking at the dates still to host it within this state fiscal year. So looking at the end of April or the latest, the first week of June, preferably earlier, because we don't really need to do things in the very last month of a state fiscal year. And potential locations, these came up again at that steering committee on the 17th before storms. Some of these were impacted by storms. So just exploring, Lisa's been reaching out to see, exploring who has the capacity and what the spaces are. If you have additional ideas, please, or thoughts on location, please share those. We will get those to Lisa. The first Technical Advisory Committee meeting is tomorrow, and they will review, as I mentioned, those objectives that were just shared and talk a little bit more about thematically what the objectives are and where we'll keep our focus. The difference with this one is very much nutrients focused on on marine side of things. It's not. It will cross over that intersection of estuarine environments, but we're not trying to bite off the entire world of nutrients in all waters of Florida. It has that red tide focus. And then some next steps. Identify the chairs for sessions, finalize our dates and locations, continue our meetings and planning throughout the calendar year and into the new year. And there's Lisa's. If you had thoughts or on locations or additional needs, please go ahead and send those to Lisa. I think I'll just pause here in case people had any questions really quickly on that, because I kind of went over it fast. And Barb does. Barb.
Just a clarification, you meant USS St. Pete?
Yes,
location?
that student ballroom is.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
Yeah. We're just trying to think of space, so it's estimated about 75. We're going with a figure of approximately 75 participants. And part of that space, I think will be directed a little bit more after tomorrow's TAC meeting, because those thematic and the sort of breakout sessions or different discussions that have to happen will help determine the space needs. But yeah, the USF St. Pete ballroom or the student center across the street has various training rooms too. Any other questions on that? Well, thanks everyone for listening to me talk about Lisa's slides and for your participation in the various groups. The second order of business Kate asked me to bring up is related to where we left off from our last meeting. So I did make 2 quick slides just to remind us of where we are. And if it goes to it there. So we are talking about our third consensus document. And this, as we discussed in the past, the first recommendations and second recommendations, this is on our priority of the progress that have been made from those documents in these different areas. And we've heard a lot of that today in the different hats from the working groups and subcommittees, as well as the grants that have gone out. So making sure that we're creating a public update and for policymakers as well as the general public, just to understand in a little bit more tangible and easily accessible way all the great work that's been happening in the scenes and behind since these documents have been published. So you have all been working in some element independently on things, following our determination of layout and content from the last meeting. And just a refresher, that first consensus document were the initial recommendations of the task force. It provided background and laid the framework in those areas of public health, communications, and management and response. The second document add some additional recommendations, as well as noted progress from the initial recommendations and embedded research within each of those, not as its own separate category. And we did some work on clarifying the sort of actionable and understanding what those different recommendations meant in practice. And so this third is extending that, pretending, this isn't necessarily the format, but my mind works thinking of it as the fourth column. What is the progress? This is an example of a management response recommendation from the second document. If we had a fourth column, what is the progress or products or future on those? So I just wanted to talk a little bit about where we are, because again, a little bit of a delay from the storms that impacted everyone to different extents. We had tried to initially say to the end of the calendar year for the final publication. We'll extend that into January to allow for some of those delays, but we are doing pretty good in terms of synthesizing and capturing general content because of the work that we did at the last meeting. But we do have some key things to address. There's a few style of presentation confirmation questions, and I'll present those to you in a minute for discussion. Still a little bit of draft content for some sections needed. We have the bulk of it. We have to identify the graphics for presenting this information, when and where not. There's certainly examples of products that we can put in it, but if we need to develop things such as timelines like we have in the past, what those are. We will need to set 2 virtual review meetings. I think maybe 1, but I believe 2. I'm guessing those will be December, and that would be a wordsmithing type meeting to finalize content, in January just for a final review of the document in a full layout, and then publish it for the public, make it public. And we will again focus on this being, we'll make it a little bit different. We will have print versions of it, but we will also focus on making sure that it's really digitally accessible and using the online tools to link out to the different initiatives and programs and products that have come out of it. So that's it in a nutshell. We do part of that timeline. It's okay to have some extension. We are working with our communications and graphics design office at FWC, as we have in the past. And as most of you know, one of the big events that FWI hosts annually is our open house Marine Quest. And our graphics designer is also the lead of those efforts. So has scheduled us to work with us through this month and next month. And so we want to take full advantage. And that's another reason to keep to this really good timeline, so that we keep having that expertise and skill. She's exceptionally skilled at design, but also at synthesizing, communicating science in a really clear way of presenting it graphically to the public. So to take full advantage of that resource, that's another reason to keep to the November, December timeline, and January just doing our little tweaks and things. So I'm hoping everyone's okay with that timeline. In terms of the few pressing questions, if I may, I will just throw them out there. If everyone's okay. Okay. There was some discussion about the order and presentation. We had talked about, since this was progress, maybe presenting it in different formats, and a few comments have come back. One is trying to keep it in a similar order and presentation as the previous, so that people aren't thrown by the one document to the next, if that makes sense. So in the past, we've had it public health, communications, management, response. That's the order. Those are the sections. And should we continue to present it in that way to make sure that if people are comparing one document to the next, there's a flow to it. I see nodding heads, but I think I just throw it out there to see just consensus. Maybe you can make a motion, Kate, because I'm not a member.
All right, so well, Dave raised his hand, so let's see if Dave has some comments before we'll just start a motion.
Okay.
So other than keeping it in the same order, which is probably my preference, what was the alternative?
So there was a few different things pulling out. One was presenting it as how all three at once, but how they might come into play during the cycle of a bloom, which would take some brain power. It doesn't mean we can't have a great visual of that represented, and then the written content in the same format. The other one was seeing if, so we agreed that each section would have sort of a story, the continued storyline throughout it would be questions that these were addressing. And the questions might be different depending on whether it was communications, public health, or management response. But one of the things was proposed, is there questions that cross all three of these areas? And then we would present by the question and how the progress is answering that question in each of the area, but leading by question rather than section topic, if that makes sense. You don't have to raise your hand. You can facilitate, Kate.
So I call on myself to say I wonder if I like the idea of having questions that are cross-cutting, but I think that might be hard to kind of set the whole document up like that. And so that might be a good topic for one of the sort of offshoots to focus on. That's just sort of a suggestion if there are questions that are particularly cross-cutting across those themes. But I do think it would be challenging to set it all up that way. That's just me.
Yeah, so I should clarify, Dave, just to, it's hard to verbalize this without some kind of physical representation, but those were sort of the two presented was, do we have a question and then public health communications management response under the question how it's answering, or do we have public health communications response and within each of those sections a sidebar of example questions that this work is going towards answering, like how do we respond to a plume, the how, what, why, where sort of thing. And I'll let you continue with your question.
Was that slide bar or sidebar? No, I'm kidding.
Yes. Well, have you made the slide bar?
So I mean, I think probably one of the better ways of thinking about this might be who the primary users are, and is there an approach that would benefit them most for get the most consumers of this the best look at what we're trying to do. So if we think most people will be referring back to 1 and 2 and then looking at 3, I think uniformity then might be better. If we're thinking we're picking up new readers that were people that have already been along for the ride and are now just looking for the fuller story, then maybe one of the other approaches work. But I mean, that's how I would think about it, is what are the users most likely, what's their level of involvement or sophistication, and if we're worried about throwing them, go for uniformity.
So I'll leave that to you to discuss now. One of the reasons I'm pressing these questions is, like I said, we do need to figure out layout. That it's, and we unfortunately you can't finalize pieces. You have to sort of do in parallel the layout and the graphics, and these are pretty foundational questions to how we structure the document and design. So just tell me, and as a unit, go ahead, Michelle.
Yeah, I don't know who the primary users are. I would think it would be policymakers. And I feel like policymakers would appreciate the uniformity, because I think, from my personal side, I would want to compare from the previous ones to see how far, the progress, right? I don't know. That's my thoughts. Like I lean towards the uniformity on that.
Go ahead, Barb.
So I agree with Michelle. I lean toward the uniformity as well, hoping that maybe maybe it'll spur them to look back if they haven't seen the first two documents. The other thing I'll bring up, I was just flipping through both of them now. We haven't done any kind of a pie chart about how the funding has been, how the money's been spent. And it would seem to me that would be another thing that policymakers would be interested in. And I'm not talking about, getting into the weeds of down to the pennies and stuff, but how many has been on external grants, how much is spent just to keep the task force going. I think that's a reasonable thing that, maybe it's just one page or half a page with a pie chart, but something about the fiscal management of the project as well.
Okay, I've captured that comment. Is there anybody anti-uniformity? Or is there anybody that has an opposing view on uniformity? Otherwise, I will assume that is the direction forward. Okay, hearing none. Dave, our audience is policymakers. Uniformity and previous readers, continuing to read, previous engaged readers. The other thing that is a question, and it's an open question, is the structure of each different section. So because it has been, the previous documents have been recommendations, it's been really clear. What is the recommendation? What does that mean? In this case, we're reporting on progress. So there's been quite a few different ways that the sections have been presented and given, and they can all be structured differently, or we can decide that we should present them in a similar format. So I'm going to give you the examples of how the narratives have come in. One has come in recommendation as the list, and then the action taken to that specific recommendation. Another has phrased it in questions, how has ... and then the answer identifying progress. And that links to the recommendation, but it's not necessarily the specific recommendation language. It's, a bit more overarching, because as we know, moving forward with the recommendations, there's tons of crossover. And progress doesn't happen really one recommendation, here's like one question, here's the answer. It's happening across all areas. So I guess the question is there a preferred format? Should, a question that it's answering in response to that progress, one, or to the listed recommendation and the action that's been taken towards that recommendation, specifically capturing the recommendation and specific progress related to that, or option 3, whatever suits that topic section best. So it's a mixed deliverable. My words are sharing me. So I throw those out to you for discussion.
Go ahead, Barb.
I'll kick it off with not the mixed. I think that just is kind of confusing. And I think we need to be consistent across the sections. My 2 cents.
Michelle?
Yes, I'm a huge fan of consistency. So my question, when you're talking about listing the recommendation and then the actions, is that, are you picturing just a table or still like narrative form?
So there's still narrative form. They've still been in narrative form. I mean, at this point, it's not like adding a 4th column to the table. It's just how the information has been presented in terms of the drafts coming in. And so we saw at the last meeting how communications presented theirs. Chuck gave, he shared at the meeting for communications specific questions, and then it went from everything to answering a specific need to, has the communications group had the resources it's needed to accomplish the goals? So
Right.
it's been a bit more of a spectrum of questions rather than, did you A, B, C from the recommendations?
I like that. I think I'm more for that format, the questions and the answers to, yeah, not just, yeah, gives us a little more room, I think, to explain things maybe.
Dwayne?
I agree with Barb and everybody who believes it needs to be consistent throughout. There's no question. But I'm going to pose this because I'm not sure I have an opinion. But when you have a list of recommendations and you put it in a question format, it's very passive. And if you put it in a statement format that isn't a question, you kind of bypass that narrative to what I would call a more active statement. And I think sometimes, and you're going to have to judge this, I think sometimes that's more powerful than if everything is posed as a question. It sets a tone of that list of recommendations that I think isn't as strong as it could be if it wasn't in a question format. So that's just my thought.
Yeah, Dwayne, I'll just add to that some of the captures just as a refresher from the last meeting that did come up. So the phrasing of the questions that are in draft right now have become sort of actual, how have we, rather than, so I think it's, anyways.
No, I agree
you guys
with that
decide, but
totally.
that it's still a question, but it's an actionable statement question. How have we addressed this? Or how have we?
Agreed. I think that's a great approach.
And I think that there will have to be some, with some of the readers and editors in some of these latter stages, they will have to read to kind of have that cohesive mindset as working through the different sections. So I think we've settled on a fairly solid approach. I think that we'll have the ability to do some of that editing, but I think also as we go back and work on various things, even before our next meeting, it will be good to have that mindset and just kind of be thinking about that. And there may be some different things we can do to help with that. But I think it's great to get that feedback on just kind of thinking a little bit more about how the readers may respond to questions versus statements. I think that's a really good point.
Those were the pressing questions, Kate. We have the content. We just need to move forward. I'll have some personal requests for individual input here and there, but those were the key formatting things we need to identify pagination, and we can lay it out, leaving space for graphics like pie charts and things, and visualize those later. But thank you for that. The second part of it, if you don't mind, is there's so many of you, it's really hard to schedule, but we will need to put something on the books in December for a virtual meeting to go through content. And this would be the written content as a group in a publicly noticed meeting. So if there are specific times you are not flexible at all in December, maybe you could let me know before I send a month-long poll to everybody.
And just as a follow-up, I know that one of the questions that Megan's been kind of pondering was whether we would ultimately print this on some level, or whether it's going to be primarily a digital document. I think that having these live as digital documents is really helpful. We often have printed out versions and taken them with us to various events. I think that can also be really effective. Not to make more work for ourselves, but in some cases, having a quick kind of one-page summary has been really helpful. And so it may be that we want even a synthesized product from the product. So that's just another thing to maybe keep in mind. And that would allow kind of all of the topics to be presented in a cohesive way, but also with, just one page to work with. So really hit those high points. Thanks for leading us through that. Do we have any questions from the task force about working document 3? Okay, so be on the lookout for some scheduling emails to try to set up these virtual meetings in December and January. And just a huge thanks to Megan and her team for helping to move this effort along, and also to all of you for your contributions to the document. And it'll be great to see this come out in a few months. So we appreciate the help getting us there. So we do have these 2 digital meetings, they're virtual meetings that we're going to try to plan. And then the next task force meeting, Megan, can you remind me, it's in February?
I'm sorry, I have to check the website. Hold on.
Okay. It is on the website if you ever need to look it up and you can't remember.
Yeah, as point of reference, I look at the website as much as anybody else. Our next meeting is February 25th, and then after that, June 10th. And we didn't get meetings on the books for the latter half of the calendar year. That we had too many conflicts, so we have to revisit that date, those dates. And if you give me one more moment, I will remind you which one was full day in person and which is the virtual.
I couldn't remember, and I wasn't even going to put you on the spot for that, but I'm glad you mentioned it.
The February 25th is full day in person.
Okay. So, so we'll also be in communication just to help facilitate travel associated with the in-person meeting in February. Okay. Before I wrap up, any other comments or questions from our task force? Okay, well, I just want to thank you all for your participation today, your work on consensus document 3, both past and future. And I will adjourn today's meeting of the HAB task force. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.